On the night of December 22, 1944, George S. Patton stood over a map table in a cold schoolhouse in Luxembourg City. Outside, engines idled in the dark. Staff officers moved in whispers. Snow pressed against the windows. In the center of the map, one name seemed to
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
glow like a warning: Bastogne. Patton traced a finger across narrow roads and frozen forests. Then he looked north. Somewhere beyond the trees, 72 German Tiger I and Tiger II tanks were moving to crush his army. They had been sent with one purpose: find Patton, break his counterattack, restore the momentum of Battle of the Bulge. German commanders believed these massive steel machines would tear through American lines like paper. By the time the fighting ended, the roads of the Ardennes would be covered with wrecked Tigers. Fewer than 10 would escape. You can almost feel the cold that night. It was the kind of cold that bit through wool gloves and froze oil in engines. Men slept beside their tanks because there was nowhere warmer to go. Snow muffled every sound except the distant rumble of artillery. The fate of the Western Front was being decided in darkness. 6 days earlier, on December 16, 1944, Adolf Hitler had launched his final great gamble in the West. 3 German armies smashed into the Ardennes, a region of steep hills and dense forest stretching across Belgium and Luxembourg. The goal was bold and desperate. German forces would split the Allied armies, cross the Meuse River, seize Antwerp, and force the Western Allies into a negotiated peace. At first, the attack stunned the Americans. Entire frontline sectors were overwhelmed. Communications failed. Roads clogged with retreating vehicles and refugees. German armored columns surged west through fog and snow. To many Allied soldiers, it felt like the dark days of 1940 had returned. But one town blocked a critical road network. Bastogne sat at the center of 7 major highways. Whoever controlled it controlled movement across the Ardennes. The Germans needed Bastogne. The Americans understood that too. Elements of the 101st Airborne Division and Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division rushed into the town. They dug foxholes in frozen ground and waited to be surrounded. By December 21, they were completely cut off. At German headquarters, confidence was rising. The Americans were isolated. The weather grounded Allied aircraft. Fuel shortages remained severe, but there was still hope that armored formations could force a breakthrough. Among the most feared weapons available were the Tigers. The Tiger was not just a tank. To many soldiers, it was a moving fortress. The Tiger carried the deadly 88 MEKWK 36 gun. The Tiger II, known to the Allies as the King Tiger, mounted an even more powerful, long-barreled 88 gun and armor so thick that many American shells bounced off at normal combat ranges. These machines weighed more than 50 and 68 tons, respectively. Their tracks crushed fences, trees, and small buildings as if they were twigs. But the Tiger had weaknesses. It consumed enormous amounts of fuel. Its complex transmission and suspension were vulnerable to breakdown. Bridges often could not support its weight. In narrow forest roads, one disabled Tiger could block an entire column. German commanders knew these problems, but they also believed that concentrated Tiger battalions could deliver a decisive blow. During the struggle around Bastogne and the southern shoulder of the Bulge, approximately 72 Tigers from several heavy tank battalions and attached units were committed against Patton's advancing Third Army and neighboring American forces. The Germans expected these heavy tanks to shatter any counterattack. They underestimated Patton. General George S. Patton was one of the most aggressive commanders in the Allied armies. He believed speed itself was a weapon. His troops had already raced across France in the summer of 1944, often advancing faster than supplies could keep up. Patton demanded constant movement, disciplined logistics, and relentless pressure. When the German offensive began, Patton was already anticipating trouble. At a conference in Verdun on December 19, Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower asked how soon Third Army could pivot north to relieve Bastogne. Most commanders spoke cautiously. Patton answered immediately. He said he could attack with 3 divisions in 48 hours. Many in the room were stunned, but Patton had already prepared contingency plans. That moment changed the battle. While German Tigers rolled west, Patton's columns began one of the most remarkable operational turns of the war. Entire divisions shifted 90 degrees in winter conditions. Tank transporters, artillery tractors, fuel trucks, ambulances, and Shermans crowded icy roads. Military police stood at crossroads around the clock, waving traffic through snow and darkness. The spearhead of the relief effort was the 4th Armored Division under Major General Hugh Gaffey. At the tip was Combat Command R, including the 37th Tank Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, a hard-driving officer who would later become one of America's most respected generals. As Patton's forces advanced north from Arlon toward Bastogne, they ran directly into German armor, anti-tank guns, and infantry. Snow and low clouds limited visibility. Villages became strongpoints. Every hill concealed danger. Meanwhile, German heavy tank units were fed into the battle to stop the Americans before they could reach Bastogne. The terrain favored defense. The Ardennes was a maze of forests and narrow roads. Heavy tanks could not maneuver freely. They were forced into predictable routes. Patton saw the opportunity immediately. He did not need to destroy every Tiger in a head-on duel. He needed to trap them. That is where the battle became an encirclement. Patton pushed on multiple axes. Infantry divisions secured the flanks. Engineers repaired bridges and cleared mines. Artillery battalions moved close behind the armor, ready to fire within minutes. American units seized villages that dominated road junctions, narrowing German escape routes one by one. The ring began to tighten. On December 23, the weather changed. The clouds broke. For the Germans, it was a disaster. Allied aircraft roared into the sky. P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bombers swept over roads and fields, attacking tanks, fuel trucks, and columns caught in the open. Supply drops reached Bastogne. The defenders held. For Tiger crews, every daylight movement became dangerous. Even if a bomb did not destroy a tank, near misses damaged tracks and optics. Field trucks burned. Ammunition carriers exploded. Recovery vehicles were knocked out. A Tiger without fuel was a steel bunker. A Tiger with a broken final drive was a roadblock. As the Americans advanced, more German tanks were abandoned by their own crews after mechanical failure or fuel exhaustion. Still, the fighting remained brutal. Near villages such as Chaumont, Bougainville, Martelange, and Assenois, Shermans and tank destroyers dueled with German armor at close range. American crews used speed and teamwork. One tank would draw fire while another maneuvered to hit the side armor. Artillery observers called in barrages that shook the ground like earthquakes. The Americans also deployed the M36 Jackson, whose 90mm gun could penetrate Tiger armor under favorable conditions. At the same time, 105mm and 155mm artillery blasted crossroads and assembly areas. The Tiger's greatest strengths, heavy armor and powerful guns, mattered less when movement was restricted and supplies were collapsing. On December 26, 1944, at approximately 4:50 p.m., lead elements of Abrams's 37th Tank Battalion reached the outskirts of Assenois. German resistance was fierce. Sherman's advance through artillery fire and anti-tank guns. Buildings burned. Infantry fought from house to house. Then, just before nightfall, an American tank column broke through to Bastogne. The siege was not fully over, but a corridor had been opened. For the trapped defenders, it was the moment they had been waiting for. For the Germans, it was a strategic defeat, yet the fighting around Bastogne intensified as German commanders hurled more armor, including Tigers, into repeated attempts to cut the corridor and destroy Patton's spearhead. This was exactly what Patton wanted. Each German counterattack pushed heavy tanks into narrowing pockets of contested roads. American artillery registered every likely approach. Forward observers, often exposed to enemy fire, called down shells with deadly precision. At times, thousands of rounds landed in a single day. The ground became a churned mixture of snow, mud, and burning metal. Tiger crews faced impossible choices: stay in place and be shelled, move by day and risk air attack, retreat along roads clogged with wrecks and abandoned vehicles, push forward into concentrated American anti-tank defenses. Every option carried danger. By late December, the German offensive was losing momentum across the Ardennes. Fuel stocks were critically low. Replacement crews were scarce. Mechanical losses mounted. The Tigers committed against Patton were being destroyed not in one massive showdown, but through continuous pressure. This was Patton's method. He kept attacking. He denied the enemy time to repair, refuel, or regroup. He turned every crossroads into a trap. The encirclement tightened further in early January 1945. Third Army advanced east and north, while other Allied forces attacked from the north. German units that had surged deep into Belgium were now fighting to escape. Roads that had carried the offensive west were now the only paths back, and many of those roads were under fire. Tiger crews often had to blow up their own tanks when they could no longer move them. Charges were placed inside the hull, breech blocks were destroyed, engines were set ablaze. Veterans later described the bitter sight of abandoning machines they considered nearly indestructible. In some cases, crews attempted nighttime withdrawals. Engines rumbled through snow-covered forests with headlights off. Drivers followed the silhouette of the vehicle ahead. One wrong turn led to mines, ditches, or American roadblocks. Few made it through. The statistics tell only part of the story. Of the 72 Tigers committed to stop Patton's advance in this sector and associated fighting, the vast majority were destroyed, abandoned, or captured. Fewer than 10 were able to withdraw in operational condition. That result was extraordinary. These were the tanks that Allied soldiers feared most. These were the vehicles that German commanders trusted to restore the front, and they had been reduced to wrecks scattered across frozen roads. American soldiers walking through the battlefield after the fighting saw burned-out Tigers with their turrets twisted, hatches open, and blackened shells lying nearby. Some tanks had been knocked out by armor-piercing rounds. Others sat intact but empty, their fuel tanks dry. The destruction left a powerful impression. One Sherman crewman later recalled standing beside a massive Tiger and realizing that the machine looked less like a monster and more like a stranded locomotive. It was huge, but helpless. That was the real lesson of the battle. Technology alone could not win. The Tiger was formidable. At long range, its 88 mm gun was devastating. Its armor was thick enough to resist many Allied weapons. In the right conditions, it could dominate a battlefield. But war is never decided by a single machine. Patton understood logistics, tempo, and maneuver better than many of his opponents. His staff organized fuel, ammunition, and traffic control under extreme conditions. His commanders exploited weak points without hesitation. His artillery and air support multiplied the effectiveness of every advancing battalion. The German heavy tanks entered battle as symbols of power. They were defeated by a system. Patton's own personality added to the effect. He projected certainty even when the situation was dangerous. He moved forward constantly, visiting units near the front. Mud splashed his polished helmet. He demanded speed, and his subordinates knew hesitation would not be tolerated. That energy mattered. Soldiers exhausted by cold and combat often kept moving because Patton insisted the attack would continue. German officers, by contrast, faced increasingly impossible orders. Hitler forbade timely withdrawals. Units were told to hold ground despite dwindling fuel and ammunition. Heavy tanks that should have been conserved were committed again and again. The result was predictable. Every day, more Tigers were lost. The battle also showcased the importance of American industrial and logistical strength. Shermans destroyed in combat were often replaced quickly. Fuel convoys kept advancing despite shell fire and icy roads. Recovery teams towed damaged vehicles for repair. Medical evacuation saved wounded crews who might otherwise have died in the snow. The Germans could not match that capacity in late 1944. Each lost Tiger represented not just steel and machinery, but trained crewmen and scarce resources that Germany could not replace. For the men inside those tanks, the experience was terrifying. A Tiger offered protection, but it was also a trap. When armor was penetrated, the interior became a furnace of burning fuel and ammunition. Escape required seconds. Many crews never made it out. American tankers faced the same danger. The difference was that by winter 1944, they fought with increasing confidence. Better tactics, improved ammunition, tank destroyers, overwhelming artillery, and air support reduced the Tiger's psychological advantage. The monster could bleed. And once that fear faded, the battlefield changed. Patton's relief of Bastogne became one of the defining moments of the Battle of the Bulge. The town held. The German offensive stalled. Allied forces regained the initiative. Within weeks, the Bulge in the front was erased. Germany had spent irreplaceable armor, fuel, and men for temporary gains. Among the most costly losses were the heavy tanks sent to stop Patton. The image of fewer than 10 Tigers escaping captures the scale of the defeat. It does not mean every tank was knocked out in dramatic one-on-one duels. Many were destroyed by artillery. Some were disabled by aircraft. Others were abandoned due to fuel shortages or mechanical failure. Several were demolished by their own crews. All were victims of the same reality. Patton had closed the trap. Years later, military historians would study the campaign as a classic example of operational flexibility. Patton's rapid pivot north remains one of the most impressive maneuvers of the Second World War. It combined planning, logistics, leadership, and relentless offensive action. The Tigers were powerful weapons, but they were committed into a battle where the enemy controlled the tempo. That enemy was Patton. Imagine the scene in the first light after a January snowfall. The forest is silent. Smoke drifts through bare trees. Along the road stands a line of enormous tanks, their steel sides scarred by shell hits, their tracks frozen into the mud. Nearby, American soldiers step carefully past spent cartridges and shattered branches. Only days earlier, these machines had been expected to crush the counterattack. Now they are abandoned monuments to a failed gamble. Patton did not defeat them with one miraculous weapon. He defeated them with speed. He defeated them with logistics. He defeated them by attacking from several directions until every retreat road became dangerous. He defeated them by refusing to stop. The story of the 72 Tigers is therefore more than a tale of destroyed tanks. It is the story of how modern war rewards coordination over intimidation. The largest gun and thickest armor mean little when fuel runs dry, roads are cut, and the enemy controls the battlefield. That winter in the Ardennes, Germany placed its faith in steel giants. Patton placed his faith in movement. Only one approach survived. As the Battle of the Bulge ended, the wrecked tigers remained where they fell, half buried in snow. Local civilians and passing soldiers stared at them in disbelief. These were the machines that had once seemed unstoppable. Now they were silent, cold, empty. Out of 72 sent to defeat Patton, fewer than 10 escaped. And in those burned-out hulls lay the final proof that in the last winter of the war, the most feared tanks in Europe were no match for a general who understood how to turn an entire battlefield into a trap.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.